I'll show you how to edit individual cells in a Treeview widget. Your users will be able to double-click a cell and edit the value directly. This involves placing an entry widget over top of a Treeview cell, which then allows the user to edit the text. The Treeview widget provides the methods we need to make this happen. Join me as we further explore the Treeview widget in Tkinter.
Hi, my name is Jobin, and I'm an open source developer. My channel is called JobinPy, and it's all about Python and Linux. Welcome to JobinPy.
I'm going to show you how to create a Treeview widget where you can modify individual cells just by double-clicking on them. For example, this row in this cell, it says Nissan Versa. If I double-click on it, it lets me change the text, and I'm just going to put in Mustang and then hit the Enter key on the keyboard, and then it updates it. So to get started with the code, I have to import Tkinter as TK, and then from Tkinter import TTK. And here I'm going to say if name equal main, then root equal tk.tk root.main loop. And basically what this line is checking is it's checking to see if this Python file is being executed by itself or whether it's being imported. So if it's being executed by itself, the name will be main. And at that point, it's just going to run this. And if it's being imported, it won't run this. Okay, so we're going to create our own Treeview class, and we're going to derive from ttk.treeview. So I'm going to put in class Treeview edit, and I'm going to derive from ttk.treeview. And we need to create the init constructor. And here we're going to ask for master and keyword arguments, if there are any. And now we're going to initialize ttk.treeview, and we're going to pass in master and keyword arguments if there are any. So essentially, we're creating our own Treeview edit class, and it's deriving from ttk.treeview. And we're asking for the master and keyword arguments, optional keyword arguments. And here we're passing the master that we received up here, and we're passing it into ttk.treeview, and same thing with the optional keyword arguments. So we're calling the init method in ttk.treeview. ttk.treeview is the super class. So we're using super to initialize ttk.treeview. Okay, so down here, I'm going to put in Treeview vehicles equal, and I'm going to make this a Treeview edit widget rather than ttk.treeview directly. So we're going to put in Treeview edit. So we're going to use our own Treeview widget, and we're going to put that into root, and let's just pack it onto the screen just so we can make sure we can see it. Expand equal true, and we can just run this to make sure. Yep, so we have an empty Treeview widget. So currently the way it stands, our Treeview edit widget is identical to ttk.treeview. In fact, there's no difference at all. But now we're going to change it and add some additional features to our own version of the Treeview widget, and we'll start on that now. Okay, so the first thing we want to do now is just populate that Treeview so we have some data to work with. So here I'm going to put in column names, and I'm going to put in vehicle name, year, and color. And we're going to pass in those column names here. So I'm going to say columns equal column names. And these are just the references to the column names. They're to the columns. They're not. This isn't what the user will see. So if we run this, we'll see that it created our columns. We have 4 columns up here. We've only defined 3, but this very first column is created by Tkinter automatically. Okay, so now let's put some text in the headers so the user can see what they're used for. So Treeview vehicles.heading, and the very first column, the one that Tkinter creates by itself, it's referenced as $0 as a string. So that's what we're doing here. So text equal vehicle type. That's going to be the very, very first column. And if we run it, we can see vehicle type here. Okay, and we're going to carry on with the rest of the headers. So vehicle name, text equal vehicle name. Next one is year, text equal year with a capital Y. So the text portion is what the user will see, which is why we're putting in capitals. And this section is just the names of the columns that the user won't see. But the text is the portion that the user will see. So the last column is color, and text equal color with a capital C. And if we run this, yeah, we see all our columns have been created, and we have text in the heading, in the headers at the top here. Okay, so now we can add some rows. We're going to add Treeview vehicles.insert, and it's going to be a root item. It's going to be by itself, not underneath another item. So the parent will be an empty string. Index will be tk.end. We're going to add it to the end of the tree view. And text will be sedan. Okay, so let's just let's just run that to see what we get. Okay, so we see sedan here. Now underneath sedan, I want to add 2 vehicles. So we actually need the item ID of the one that we just inserted. So here I'm going to put sedan row equal and that's going to give us the identifier for the row that we just inserted. And in that identifier, we're going to use that identifier to add more rows underneath it. So we're going to add our first vehicle. So Treeview vehicles.insert parent will be this, so sedan row. And we're not going to use text because text is for the very first column. But now we need to add in values, or actually before that, index equal tk.end, and now values equal, and then a tuple. And now we specify the columns that we used here, or the text that we want to appear in those columns. So vehicle name will be the very first one. So here I'm just going to put in Nissan Versa, year 2010, color silver. Let's just run that to see what we get. Okay, so we have sedan. We can see that little arrow here. When we click on it, it expands, and within sedan we see Nissan Versa and all that info. And let's add one more vehicle. Parent equal sedan row, index equal tk.end, and values will be Toyota Camry 2012, and we'll make that blue. Okay, so let's just run that to make sure we have Toyota Camry in there, and we do. Okay, so now we have some data to work with. So the very first thing that we want to do now is we need to bind to the double click event. So when I double click my mouse, I want it to do something. So let's work on that first. So here in the init method for Treeview edit, I'm going to put in self.bind, And I'm going to bind double 1 with a capital D. And the 1 is basically a left click, so a double left click. And we want to bind that to our own method. So I'm going to call the method on double click. And it's going to pass in an event automatically. And we'll actually need to do something with that event. So let's use self.on double click. And let's just make sure it works. So we're going to print double clicked. So we're binding to a double click, left click. And when the user double clicks on the Treeview widget, it's going to run this method, and we should see double clicked down here. So let's just make sure that works. Yeah, it does. It says double clicked. I'm going to double click on it again. Yep, it works. So there's instantly one problem here. Watch what happens when I double click the header at the top. So see where it says year? I'm going to double click on that. And right now we have 2 double clicks here. Watch what happens. On the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. So now we see a third double click. So what I wanted to show you is the double click is working fine, like the event and the binding is working fine. But it's registering a double click everywhere in the Treeview widget. And I'm not interested when the header gets double clicked. I'm only interested if the very first column here, the tree column gets clicked, or if one of these cells gets clicked. So now we need to detect which part of the tree view has been double clicked. So to do that, I'm going to reference a website which lists various methods of the Treeview widget. And there's a good explanation of what they do. So this is the website. It's tkdocs.com/shipment. And I'll put a link in the description as well. And looking at the information here, one method that's very useful to us is identify region. So identify region takes in 2 arguments, an X coordinate and a Y coordinate. And this method is useful for us to detect what section of a tree view has been clicked. So let's use that. So it's called identify region. So if we go back to our code, we can say region clicked equal self dot identify region. And we have to give it the X and Y. The reason why it wants the X and Y is we're asking it to identify the region, but it needs to know which region we want it to look at. So the good part is when the double click event or binding fires, this event variable will have the X and Y coordinates of the mouse. So this is perfect to use with identify region. So here we just say event.x and event.y. And the reason why we're using self here is because we're referencing Treeview edit, which derives from ttk.treeview. So when we say self.identify region, we're basically calling the Treeview widget and using the identify region method within that Treeview widget. In this case, it's our Treeview widget that we defined here, so we use self. Okay, so let's print region clicked and see what it gives us. Okay, so I'm going to double click this section and it's going to show up here. Okay, it says nothing, which is perfect. That's a good description of it. Let's double click on sedan. Okay, so that's the tree area. Perfect. Let's double click on Nissan Versa. Cell. Perfect. And let's double click a heading like vehicle name. Heading. So that's very interesting. That's very useful information. So out of the ones that we see here now, the only two that we're really interested in are tree and cell. So let's put that in our method. We're going to say if region clicked not in tree, cell, and return. In other words, if region clicked is not tree or cell, return this method, and this will actually just return none, like the Python none. So let's make sure that works. Okay, I'm going to double click the heading at the top. Yep, nothing's happening. It's not printing down here. If I double click sedan, we see tree, and let's double click Nissan Versa. Oh, I double clicked on it twice. Yeah, so we see cell. Perfect. Yeah, that's working. And now we can double click on the blank area here on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. And nothing at all. It's not registering it. So, yeah, so that's working perfectly. So now we've identified the region that we're interested in, tree and cell. Now we need to figure out what was double clicked. So in other words, the actual item. We need to find out which item was double clicked. But before that, I'm just going to put some documentation here. Identify the region that was double clicked. And here we're going to say we're only interested in tree and cell. Now we need to find out which item was double clicked. So we're going to put which item was double clicked. Going back to this page here, there's another method which is very useful. So identify column. So given an x coordinate, so it takes an x coordinate, so just one argument, it basically tells us which column is at that x coordinate. So let's try it out. Okay, so here we'll say column equals self.identify column, and we're going to pass an x. So in this case, we can pass an event.x because again, event has the coordinates of the mouse pointer. And let's just print out column and see what we get. Okay, if I double click on sedan, I see number 0, perfect. If I double click on Nissan Versa, number 1, the next column, number 2, and the last column, number 3. So we can see that they're being identified with the number sign and then a number starting with 0. And number sign 0 is pointing towards the very first column, the tree column. Okay, so that's also useful information. At least now we know which column is being double clicked on. So now we need to find out which item was double clicked. So I'm going to put selected IID. IID is essentially the ID equal self.focus. This will give us the ID of the item that was double clicked. Then we're going to put in selected values equal self.item, and we'll pass in the selected ID. So this will give us the ID of the selected item, and I'll show you what this outputs first. So selected ID or IID will give us the following. If I double click on this, I001. And if I double click on Nissan Versa, I002. On 2010, it'll give us I002 again. So this is in reference to the rows. So this row is I001. This one is I002, and Toyota Camry is I003. Now we want to get the values on this line of the item that was double clicked, or the row that was double clicked. And I'll show you what this looks like as well. This basically contains all the information for that row. Okay, if I double click on sedan, I see the text is sedan, there's no image, values is set to nothing, and the rest we're not concerned about. And Nissan Versa, if I double click on the second row here, there is no text because the text would be here, but the values does contain something. So sedan doesn't contain values, but Nissan Versa and Toyota Camry, these are values. So everything that we see here on this side where my mouse pointer is circling, these are values, and sedan here is text. So this row contains text but no values, and this row, so the second and third rows, they don't contain text but they contain values. So everything in the very first column would be considered text, and everything after the first column, so here, would be considered values. And the reason why the very first column here is text is because this is the tree column, which is why we can see that arrow. Okay, so we need to treat the very first column a little bit differently than the rest of the columns. Here, when we look at Nissan Versa, notice it doesn't have text, but it does contain values. And the sedan row, the very top one, it has text, but it has no values. So let's add some documentation here. So selected IID, for example, I001, so we know what it looks like. Selected values, this will contain both text and values from the given item IID. So we need to treat the very first column differently. So we'll say if column equal number sign 0, we want to get the text, because column number 0, or item number 0, I should say, it doesn't contain any values. It just says sedan. Okay, so if column equal number sign 0, we just want the text. So selected text equal selected values dot get, because it's a dictionary. Yeah, everything that we're seeing here is a dictionary. So selected values dot get, and we want the text. And if it's not the very first column, then we want to get the value. So here we'll say selected text equal selected values dot get values, because we're getting the values here. Okay, and let's just see what that gives us so far. So we're just going to print selected text and see what that gives us. Okay, so the very first column here, sedan, if I double click on it, it gives me sedan, perfect. So now we know that sedan was double clicked. What if I double click on Nissan Versa, what do I get? Okay, so I'm getting too much information. I don't want the whole row. I don't want all the values. I just want the individual cell value that was double clicked. So in order to do that, we need to know which index was double clicked. So up here, we know which column was double clicked. So if we print out column again, up here, we can see what information it gives us. So the very first column here, it's going to print out number 0, then Nissan Versa number 1, 2010 number 2, and silver number 3. So we know the column that's being double clicked on, but we need to convert that into an integer so that we can specify the index that we want here. So let's do that. So we'll say column index equal column and everything after the first digit. So for example, number sign 0 will become 0 as an integer. But in this case down here, the beginning column will actually be 1, because 0 is the tree column and 1 will be the starting point. So for example, sedan is number 0 and Nissan Versa is 1, and then 2010 is 2 and silver is 3. So in order for us to know what was double clicked, we need to minus it by 1. So let's do that. So we're going to get this as a from a string to an integer, but we want to minus 1. Okay, so now number sign 0 will become -1. Number sign 1 will become 0, etc. And now that we know the column index, like the integer, then we can use it here, and we'll say column index. Okay, so let's just run that and see what we get. So the very first column again. Oh, I actually have to convert it to an integer here first. Forgot to do that. So we're converting it to an integer now, and then we're subtracting it by 1. Okay, so let's just try that again. So here, if I double click on it, I see sedan, perfect. If I double click on Nissan Versa, I see Nissan Versa. And if I double click on 2010, I see 2010 and Toyota Camry, blue, yep. So now we're getting the text that we want to see. So far, this is great. So the next method that we'll be interested in is the bbox method. And the bbox method is this one. So it takes in the item IID, which is like I001, the string. And optionally, you can pass a column. And what this will return is the X position, the Y position, the width, and the height. And X and Y will be the top left-hand corner of the cell. So essentially, it's going to give us the border or the boundary of a given cell. So this will be perfect because we're going to put an entry widget in that cell, in that boundary. So let's try using the bbox method and see what it gives us. So I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to say column box equals self.bbox, and the item. So it wants the item and it wants the column. So the item is the selected IID, which we got from the focus method, such as 001 as a string. Okay. And the column, we're just going to pass in column. And the column will be this. For example, number sign 0, number sign 1, number sign 2. So the very first column is number 0 followed by number 1. And this is also a string. So we're passing in those two pieces of information. And let's see what column box contains when we run this. Okay, so if I double click on Nissan Versa, it gives me this. So 201 is the X coordinate of this cell. Y is the Y position of where it starts. So this is the top left-hand corner of where this cell starts. And 200 is the width of this cell. And 20 is the height of this cell. If I double click on it again, it's going to give me the same thing. So watch what happens. I'm going to expand the cell a little bit. So you see where it says vehicle name? I'm going to drag this and create it. And I'm going to drag this and make it longer. Just a little bit. And now if I double click on Nissan Versa again, So I increased the width. Notice now the width, it says 215. And now I'm going to make it smaller. Now it says 101. If I double click on silver, it gives us 601 because this is where this one starts. If I double click on sedan, it starts at 1 and the Y position is 20. So this is perfect. It gives us the coordinates that we need to put an entry widget onto this tree view. And that's actually the next step. So now we can create a new entry. So I could put in entry edit equal ttk dot entry. I'm going to put it into root, but here I'm going to specify the width. So I'm going to say width equal column box, and we're going to make it the same width as the cell, which is this element, this index here. So it would be 0, 1, and 2. So we need to give it 2. And now we can place it onto our tree view. So I'm just going to say entry edit dot place. And so we're not going to use pack and we're not going to use grid for this entry. We're going to use place because place will let us put the widget exactly where we want based on the X and Y coordinates. Okay, so here we're going to place it and we're going to pass in X equal column box 0 because this is the X. Y equal column box 1. W for width, column box 2. Height equal column box 3. Okay, and if we run this, let's see what we get. So I'm just going to double click on Nissan Versa. And there we go. We have a perfectly placed entry widget that covers the cell. If I double click on any other cells, it does the same thing. And you can see that they're exactly the same width and height and position of those actual cells. And if I double click on sedan, I get the same thing. So they're all perfectly placed. So there's obviously some changes that we need to make. When I move my mouse pointer away from one of those entries, I want the entry to disappear. And if I press enter, I want it to update. Okay, so let's work on that. Okay, so before that, we need to actually record the column index that we're editing. So I'm going to put that as part of the variable that's used for the entry widget. So we're going to create our own variable within that entry widget. So entry widget dot editing column index equal column index, and entry edit dot editing item IID equal selected IID. So here I'm going to record the column index and item IID. So when the entry widget first comes up, when you double click on the tree view, we want it to contain the text of that cell. So let's do that, because right now when you double click on it, the entry widget is empty. So we can do something like this: entry edit dot insert 0 selected text. So at index 0, we want to add the selected text, and we should also select the text that's within that entry. So we'll say entry widget select range, and we're going to say from index 0 all the way to tk.end, like that. And now we should focus on the actual entry widget itself. So this places the focus on the widget. Okay, so I'm just going to run this to see what we have so far. Okay, so if I expand this and if I double click on Toyota Camry, perfect. So we can see that the entry that we see here, it contains the same text as the Treeview cell behind it. And it also started off as being all selected. And if I do the same thing with Nissan Versa, it's the same thing, as well as the other columns and also this row here. So we still have an issue here where the entry widgets are not going away. So when I click my mouse outside of the entry, I want the entry to disappear. So let's do that now. So here I'm going to say entry edit dot bind, and we're going to bind to a new event. It's going to be called focus out. So capital F and capital O. And we want to run our own method. So we'll say on focus out. And it's going to pass in an event automatically. So when the entry loses focus, it's going to fire this method. Self.onFocusOut. And what we want to do here is in event, there's going to be a reference to the widget itself. So event.widget is what we're interested in. And so what's going to happen is when the focus is lost, this will run and the event variable will contain the widget that lost focus, which in this case it'll be entry edit. So here we want to destroy the widget so it's no longer, on the screen. So event.widget.destroy. Let's just run that to make sure it works. Okay, I'm going to double click on sedan. I'm going to click out of it and it disappears. Yeah, perfect. So same thing with Nissan Versa. If I click out of it, the entry widget gets destroyed. It gets unloaded. So that part is working great. Now we need to implement the actual update portion of it. So I want to make it so that when I double click on it, and if I type in some new text, and if I hit the enter key, I want the entry widget to disappear, but I also want the new text that I type in to update the cell. So let's do that now. Okay, so the next binding, there's going to be a new binding, entry edit.bind return. And we're going to run on enter pressed. So define on enter pressed self, and it's also going to pass in an event automatically. And here we can get the text from the entry widget. So we can say new text, the new text that the user typed in, equal event.widget, because again, event.widget references the entry widget, dot get. Okay, so this will contain the new text that the user typed. And we also want to know the item ID that is currently being edited. And we know that because we recorded it here in the entry widget variable. So we made it called, we called it editing column index and editing item IID. So we can use those two variables here. So selected IID equal event.widget.editing item IID, such as I002. So this will be a string in reference to the row. And we also need the column index. So column index equal event.widget.editing column index. And we have this because we recorded it here. And this will be something like, such as -1 for the tree column, 0 for the first self-defined column, and so on. So now if the tree column is being updated, we want to set the text. And if it's not the tree column, if it's one of the columns to the right of the tree column, then we want to set the values. Okay, so we'll do that here now. So we'll say if column index equal -1. If it's -1, it's going to be the tree column, the column that says sedan. If it's -1, then we want to say self.item. Self is in reference to the Treeview widget. Self.item. And the item that we want to update is selected IID, which is a string such as this, like II02, for example. And then text equal new text. And the text is here. And if it's not the very first column, if it's not the sedan column, we want to get the value of the dictionary, like the values section. So we'll say selected values equal self.item selected IID dot get values. So this will contain all the information for that row for this IID. But we only want to update a certain part of it. Actually, we'll change this to current values, like that. Okay, so we should run this to see what we get so far. But before that, when the enter key is pressed, we want to actually remove the insert widget so it's not displayed on the screen anymore. So we'll say event.widget.destroy. So after the enter key is pressed, it goes through all this and gets the text that the user typed and the section that we need to update. But in the end, we want to remove the entry widget. So let's just try that. Okay, so if I type in van here where it says sedan, it updates fine. Okay, so the other columns don't currently work yet. So I just want to print current values so we could see what it contains before we update it. Okay, so if I double click on Nissan Versa, we'll look at the output down here. And I'm going to change this to Mustang. Okay, so we have Nissan Versa 2010 and silver. So we have the values section here. We only want to update the index that we're interested in. So the one that we're editing. So in this case, we just want to update the Nissan Versa part. So we have to tell it current values column index equal new text. And now we have to send that entire value section back into the Treeview. So we'll say self.item selected IID values equal current values. So we're essentially sending this back to the Treeview, except with the updated section, whichever column that was changed, and that's in column index. That's what that's why we're getting the column index here. Okay, so we don't need to print this anymore. This should actually update it. Okay, let's just run this. And if I change this to Mustang, yep, it works. If I change this 2010 to 2020, yep, it works. In the last column, we'll change this to red. Yep, and that works too. So now we can update any part of the Treeview, like the cells, just by double clicking on them. There are some improvements that can still be made to this. For example, if I double click on an empty cell, like here, it'll give me an error. But we just need to add some error handling in some parts. But the fundamentals and the main portion of the code is pretty much complete.
The Treeview widget in Tkinter is both customizable and straightforward to use. We saw how to modify the data in a Treeview widget by placing an entry widget over the cells when double-clicked. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Until the next tutorial, thanks for watching.